Are you thinking of buying a home in Edmonton? What on earth does it all cost? Watch this video. We're going to talk about all the costs incurred for buying a home in Edmonton. So in this video, we're going to talk about all of the costs that are going to be needed to buy a home in Edmonton. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you from the beginning of the process, from when you meet with me, all the way to when you get keys, so that you can know an all-encompassing big picture view of all the costs that you need to budget for and make sure that you have set aside. So, number one thing you do when you're looking to buy a house is you talk to a mortgage broker to figure out what you qualify for. That costs you $0. Talking to a mortgage specialist at a bank costs you $0. It is very important to note that if you are wanting to shop for rates, I would highly recommend working with a broker. They do one credit pull and then they shop the rates for you. If you start shopping on your own, it's going to cost you credit every single time they pull credit. So really important to make sure that if you are talking to people to see if you want to work with them, make sure you don't fill out an actual application, because every time you fill and sign on a dotted line, you are giving them permission to pull your credit. So a quick side note before we dive right into the costs is if you are coming from another province or out of country, I just want to talk to you about the differences to buying a home here at Edmonton. So we don't have, if you're coming from another province in Canada, we don't have HST. Now, what is HST? HST is the harmonized sales tax. That's usually the provincial and the GST combined together that the federal government implements, and then it is put on all purchases. Now in Alberta, we have GST. That's it, federal sales tax. We don't have provincial sales tax. When you're looking at, again, I know my clients in Ontario and BC have paid this, and we don't have this here. Land transfer tax. It could be thousands to tens of thousands of dollars that, guess what, you don't pay here in Alberta. So that is an Alberta advantage for moving from one of those provinces over, and you don't need to worry about budgeting for that because we don't have that. If you're coming from another country, something to consider is, how are you paying for your house? Are you getting a mortgage or are you paying cash? Those are things that are going to be important to know if you're a permanent resident or if you're a Canadian citizen. That's a little bit more complex, and we'll talk about it in another future video. But those are things that will cost you in terms of maybe more down payment that you will need versus a regular Canadian citizen who can just put 5% down. Now, down payment wise, that is a cost to you of buying a home. You do have to put a down payment for everybody, no matter where you're from. Buying a house in Edmonton requires that minimum 5% down payment. So depending on the house price, it's 5% of the house price. If you are wanting to avoid CMHC, you can put 20% down or more. That then saves you the cost of CMHC. I can't tell you the exact dollar amount because it depends on your actual purchase price, and it depends on some other factors. A mortgage broker will be able to break down those costs. So down payment, CMHC costs, some of the things that you want to start to think about and add to your list. So when we sit down and do a buyer consultation, zero cost to you, and coffee is on me. So we're going to sit down and talk about what you're looking for, how I can help you, the locations, the schools, everything that's important to you. We want to find out all things you to make sure we find your dream home. The next step after we have the consult was we start looking at homes. The cost of looking at homes, zero. Well, you got to pay for gas. So if we're driving all around, you want to consider the gas price, but usually it's $0 other than the gas cost. Now, once we get to the stage where you found a home that you like, we're going to be writing an offer. How much does writing an offer cost? Zero. Well, I don't charge you anything to write the offer. There will be a deposit affiliated with that offer. So if we get the offer accepted, we will submit a deposit. That deposit is held in trust at the real estate brokerage that whoever the listing side is. So what is a deposit typically? Again, it's dependent on the purchase price of the house. So I have seen as little as $2,000 all the way up to $10,000 or $20,000. If you're buying a home for, let's say, $400,000, we're looking at typically anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 for your deposit. It's going to be dependent also on the seller. The seller may counter back and want more deposit. This deposit is just showing your seriousness on purchasing the property. And you're still not going to lose that money during your due diligence stage, because if during due diligence stage you realize you don't want to buy the property, that money is fully refunded to you. You don't lose that money. Now, if you're building new and we're putting an offer in, builders only require $1,000, and they usually take a check and they don't cash it, or they take a credit card, which obviously they do take the $1,000, but again, they can refund it totally back to you during your due diligence stage. With the new builds, you can put a lot hold down first before we write an offer, or we can go straight to the offer, but the $1,000 doesn't change. So we've written an offer. During that stage, you've got the bank is doing your financing and you're doing home inspection. Maybe you're doing condo doc review. During that stage, you're going to be incurring some more costs. So that's called the conditional stage. Usually you have about 2 weeks for conditions. On a new build, you're typically just doing financing condition, sometimes a home inspection condition. Financing, it may cost you some money for an appraisal depending on the lender. So the appraisal usually costs about $300 to make sure you budget $300 to $400. They need to send an appraiser out to make sure the house actually appraises for what we purchased the house for. For inspections for resale and for new, there's a variety of inspections that you can get done. The most common is the general home inspection, which is about $550 plus GST, or I think sometimes that's including GST. And they're going to take a look at the whole house. They're generalists, right? But you may, if there's a fireplace, you may very well need to get a wet inspection. This inspection is going to cost you an extra $150. This is required for your home insurance because they want to know when it was last serviced, the condition it's in, all that important stuff. In a general home inspection, you're going to find out other information that your home insurance will actually need to know, such as the age of the home, the age of the shingles, the age of the furnace, all those types of things that they need to know for insurance sake. Now, if we're buying a home in an older area, I typically recommend a sewer scope. So what is a sewer scope? You have all those lovely, beautiful tree-lined streets, right? But we want to make sure those tree roots aren't going into your sewer line because it's going to cost quite a bit of money. Part of the sewer line is obviously the city, but then on your property, it's your responsibility. So we want to find out prior to removing conditions if that is okay or if it needs to be serviced. It could end up costing you a lot of money, but we want to make sure we negotiate up front. So if you're keeping track right now, you're writing down the down payment cost, the CMHC cost, the deposit. Now the deposit comes off down payment, so you're not double paying it. Then you're also going to think about all the inspection costs that you want to incur. If you want to get any professional inspections such as a structural engineer, or you want to have some other specialized focus, you want to budget more money for that too. A structural engineer, typically at least $1,000 that we're looking at, again, depending on what you're looking at. And then if you're buying a condo, you want to make sure you slot about $500 for reviewing condo docs. That company, all they do is review docs. You can have your lawyer review them, but the lawyer fees typically are higher than $500 to review the condo docs. And why that's important? Again, you want to make sure you know what you're buying and getting yourself into, because what if there's something coming down the pipe that you didn't know, and it's going to actually cost you even more money once you move into the property. So those are the costs that are incurred during this due diligence time, and it's really important that you budget for that because it's so important that we don't forget to do our due diligence. Super important to do that. Now, once you've removed conditions, you've decided, yes, I'm good with this, I'm removing conditions. The cost of actually removing conditions, the writing of the waiver doesn't cost you anything. I'm doing it for you. And on that lines, my services to you cost you this. So my fees are covered by the seller, whether it be a new build, the builder pays it, whether it be a seller for sale by owner or on MLS, the seller's paying my cost from the sale proceeds of the sale of their home. So you don't have to worry about that cost. Now, in terms of removing conditions, when you remove conditions with a new build, they require the full 5% down. Now, if you're doing 10, 20% down with a new build, you don't need to put all that up front because obviously it's going to take you 8 to 10 months to build, right? So they require 5% down up front when you remove conditions. Big difference when you do resale, they're going to require the rest of the deposit we've negotiated in the contract. So if the contract said we're doing a full $4,000 and then $4,000 on condition removal, that's going to cost you another $4,000. If you decided we're $5,000 period, just the initial, and there's nothing after removal of conditions, then it costs you nothing. So that's something to make sure you understand. In the process between removing conditions to when you get the home, what other costs are you going to incur? Well, you're going to go see a lawyer before you get the house, and you're also going to set up your home insurance. So your home insurance, again, is a number I can't give you. You have to talk to your home insurance company to find out how much your home insurance will be because it depends on the size of the home, the age of the home, and if you bundle it up with your car insurance, you can also get a better deal that way. You're going to be setting up your property taxes, and property taxes obviously are very dependent on each property and location. If you're buying your home in November, and that's when you move in November, they're going to prorate it. If the seller's already paid for the taxes ahead of time, they'll just prorate the taxes, so you'll owe that amount of money. When you go to the lawyers figure out what's called disbursements. So they figure out all the extra costs. Now, a lawyer fee is typically anywhere from $900 to like $1,200. That's the lawyer fee. There's still disbursement costs. So I tell people to slot off about $1,500 to $2,000. Might be a little bit on the high side, but it's important to make sure you have that blocked off for closing costs, because your disbursements are not always set. They're not always the same. Not all sellers pay their property taxes in advance. Some of them are doing it monthly, some of them do. You're also paying for your land title transfer. So the title of the home is registered in the seller, it's being moved over to you, and you are paying for that movement. The lawyer helps facilitate that. And in Alberta, you do need to have a lawyer facilitate the home sale. I know in some different provinces you can just have a notary help you, but not in Alberta. You have to actually have legal costs incurred. So that cost is the final cost you're going to be paying. And of course, your moving costs. So whatever you're going to pay to pack and move, and whether you're moving from across the city or whatnot. Another cost you might want to consider also is mail forwarding. So important that wherever you're moving from, that you're getting the mail coming over. Getting a mail key though with Canada Post does not cost you anything if it's sitting in the house. Sometimes sellers actually get rid of the key and then they need you to go to Canada Post to get a mail key. Or if you're a new home, there's no existing mail key, it will cost you some money to go and get that key, but it's all dependent again on your specific situation. So some of the other things that I don't want you to forget about that wasn't necessarily in the process, it's going to be ongoing afterwards. If you're in a neighborhood that has HOA, Homeowners Association fee, that's a yearly fee that has to get paid. Don't forget that you'll have to pay it. So if you moved in November, for example, in Rosenthal, you have to pay for the November, December, because it restarts again in January. If you have condo fees, you have to make sure you get that set up and pay your regular condo fees as the months go on. Another cost after the fact would be, if you're building new, is landscaping. They typically only do rough grade. You have to do the black dirt, which is final grade. You have to pay for the city to come out. They have to pay for the surveyors to come out to kind of check everything out before the city comes out. Window coverings is something to consider when you're building. So that's another cost that's being incurred. When you're buying resale, after you've moved in, there's no really extra costs than what I've talked to you about. So it's important to think about all the different costs when you're buying a house. This is specific to Edmonton. I know there's different costs when you're buying in, if you're buying in British Columbia, or you're buying in Toronto, or if you're buying in New York. Of course, it's all different. This video hopefully helped. If you have any other questions, comment down below. Give me a thumbs up and if it helped you, and we'll talk to you next time.